Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thanks for being here. Is it working? Yeah, okay. Okay, hi. My name is Lorraine Jacobs. I'm co-chair along with Mark Miller, and we tend to be here every Sunday morning when there's a forum and try to make things happen. So thank you for being here. A couple of announcements and things before we get started. Next Sunday, the 12th, is our last forum for the season. We will resume again in September. So that forum is on the Law Forward organization. And then we will return. The next Sunday, the 19th, is the Sunday for our annual meeting. And so there'll be a service at 10 and then a nice breakfast together and then the annual meeting. So that's the next 2 Sundays. You can plan ahead. We do have a basket that we pass around later on in the service. This in the forum. This is for expenses for the forum. We have a lot of computer issues or material and sometimes need to replace things or whatever we need, microphones we have to pay for. So if you want to, you can put money in here. And then I would just like to invite Bob Monahan yeah, good old Bob. Come on up. And he's our host today. He'll be introducing our speaker.
No, shameless plug. I have been involved with MICAH since around 2017. I am the previous treasurer. Kathy graciously stepped into that spot, so allowed me to step out of serving as a treasurer. So I offered to host the session, introduced Kathy. And as you can see from the slide, today's topic, Beloved Community, is one of 3 themes in a campaign that MICAH started in August last year. It began with an event, a press conference with close to 100 religious faith leaders from Milwaukee, from a range of faiths, Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, Lutheran, Baptist, all kinds of Christian denominations, Unitarians, signing a statement endorsing that We All Belong campaign. The Beloved Community is a piece of that. And the other 2 themes, protecting democracy, dovetails very well with our Defend Democracy team here at First Church. You may have been introduced a little bit to We All Belong in January when we did our Democracy Day. Sister Barbara Farr presented a little bit about the We All Belong campaign. Kathy Schluter, who is the current treasurer at MICAH, a member of the We All Belong campaign steering committee, and also co-chair of their education committee, is going to talk about Beloved Community. And I guess, to tap into a theme that we hear often, if you ask 10 Unitarians what Beloved Community meant, you'll get 10 answers. And so hopefully today, with Kathy's presentation, we can explore that theme of Beloved Community. What does that mean to us personally? What does it mean to us as a faith community here at First Church? What does it mean in the broader community? And how do we get there? What are some of the things that we can do? So with that in mind, I'd like Kathy to go ahead and get us started.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is a topic that I think is going to be really interesting to a lot of people as we try to think about what is an alternative to white Christian nationalism. What do we offer? And Beloved Community is, I think, what we can offer. But of course, then what is it? And how do we get there? Because it's a very challenging concept. And so we're going to walk through a little bit here, and then I'm really interested. I feel like you could teach me about this because I feel like Unitarians are so embedded in all of this Beloved Community, more so than maybe my own church is. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. This is a kind of a long presentation, and so I think rather than we're going to do breakout groups, I'm not sure we're going to have time for that. Maybe we'll do it for one of them and see where we go. But otherwise, we'll just kind of have some give and take. So let's get going. This was all what Bob had mentioned. This is our We All Belong campaign and the 3 themes that we are talking about. And then we define what it means to build beloved community. And what we say here is that we, as people of faith, we believe in what Dr. Martin Luther King called the beloved community. And the beloved community works for the betterment of all Americans, respects the value. We're talking about America right now, so it's not just Americans, frankly, but right now we're talking about America. Respects the value of every human being, celebrates diversity, supports equity and inclusion, and stands for those whom others would exclude. We seek to build this beloved community for the many races, faiths, cultures, and ways of life that together make up this nation. And beloved community is a place where we all belong. So what does it actually mean? There's a lot of places you can find definitions for beloved community, but these, right? This is one that Sojourner put out. We said it combines the strength of both words. Beloved is a religious expression. So from the Christian faith and the Jewish faith, that we're made in the image and likeness of God, which means that we are the same, equally loved. But also our Constitution says that every person has the unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we're created equal. And it didn't quite mean that when they wrote it, but it's meant that over time. As they said, it's free-ish. Community is something that we, social animal, we're built for this, and so to create a community where everyone is respected, enabled to thrive, and to realize their God-given potential. So that is one definition. I would say that I really love the principle from the Unitarian Universalism that talks about a beloved community as diverse people who come together in interdependent relationship of love, mutual respect, and care that seeks to realize justice. So that's what you say, and I think that's really, I love that. But what did Martin Luther King say? And I think what he talks about is kind of when the rubber hits the road in a way. This is the tougher part of what beloved community is. So he says, for one thing, that all people can share in the wealth of, I can't even read this because I've got something over there, of the nations. And what does that really mean? And that would actually require reversing the wealth gap that we've seen grow over the last 40 years, where the 20% of wealth from the very lower income has gone to the upper 0.1%. That would have to change. And they're not going to want that to change. The next one is that poverty, hunger, and homelessness would not be tolerated. Well, right now, we have to stop viewing then people who are poor and hungry as immoral slackers, which is how they're described by a lot of the conservatives. And we can't make homelessness a crime, which is what is being proposed right now. Racism and all forms of discrimination and bigotry need to be replaced by a spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Well, racism is deeply embedded in this country. We are a very racist country. It's our original sin, as Jim Wallace would say, and the centerpiece of white Christian nationalism. So first we have to acknowledge that we are all racists. That's just part of our nature. It's not that we're bad or good, it's just that who we are. And then that we have personal and systemic racism in this country, and that we need to work to eradicate it. A lot of people won't even admit that they're racist. And that's a pretty hard place to start from if you don't even think that you are. Then we talk about interpersonal, group, or international disputes that would be resolved peacefully. And that's a tough one. You look at the war in Ukraine, what do you do when somebody invades you? That's hard to have peace at that point. But you look at other things like the Israeli-Gaza conflict, then maybe there's a way to find a peaceful reconciliation there. But that's a tough one too. And then of course, love and trust will triumph over fear and hatred. That means we're going to have to stop with these fake news, with fear mongering, with stereotyping, and with polarization, and actually look to dialogue, which is also something that we've kind of lost that skill set. And finally, that we keep going, he talks about it's not a passive thing. It agitates, it protests, it actively resists oppression and works for and demands justice. And that means that we have to understand the tactics of the conservatives because they're way ahead of us, frankly, in some of their tactics. and our own weaknesses. But also we have to organize, strategize. We have to message effectively. We have to do some things that we haven't been, frankly, all that good at. So I wanted just to play, hope this works, just a very brief piece of Dr. King's. He never actually gave a speech where he described love and community, but as if he did, but he never did. But this is a little piece of how challenging it is and what he's asking people to do. So let's just.
Of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. The aftermath of nonviolence is redemption. Is reconciliation. The aftermath of violence, however, is bitter. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. The aftermath of nonviolence is redemption. The aftermath of nonviolence is reconciliation. The aftermath of violence, however, is bitterness. This is the thing I'm concerned about. Let us fight passionately and unrelentingly for the goal of justice and freedom. Let's be sure that our hands are clean in this struggle. Let us never fight with falsehood and violence and hate and malice, but always fight with love, so that when the day comes that the walls of segregation have completely crumbled in Montgomery, we will be able to live with people as their brothers. Oh, my friend, our aim must be not to defeat Mr. Engelhardt, not to defeat Mr. Challis and Mr. Gale and Mr. Park. Our aim must be to defeat the evil that's in them. But our aim must be to win the friendship of Mr. Gale and Mr. Challis and Mr. Engelhardt. We must come to the point of seeing that our ultimate aim is to live with all men as brothers and sisters under God.
Okay, so what's
the aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of.
So what's he saying there? He's talking about nonviolence for one thing, but then he's talking about redemption and reconciliation. And he's talking about men back in the days of the marches that were beating the marches, sending, putting dogs on them and fire hoses on them. And he's saying we need to make them our friends. And that's a piece that is really, really hard. But it also is something I've got another talk that I give about messaging. And the same theme comes out, that we have to, instead of seeing somebody as an enemy to defeat, that we need to see them as a brother and sister that we need to bring on board. Real challenge, that's a skill set. So then the question is, okay, then given how hard this is, and there's a lot of things, it's almost contrary, not intuitive in a lot of ways to our society today. So why do it? So for Christians, we say, well, Jesus called us to build beloved community when he said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He was talking about bringing the kingdom of God to earth. So we say, love your neighbor. That means you offer a place where everybody belongs and they're loved and accepted for who they are, including those who feel different and marginalized. That will challenge us to become our very best selves, the people that God wants us to be. And even though it's never completely realized, because we're talking about building a beloved community, you never really talk about being one, because it's almost like perfection. We never quite get there, but the process is one that is redemptive. And so certainly is an alternative, a better alternative to Christian nationalism that relies on fear, hate, power, and exclusion. Those are contrary to everything that Christians aren't the only ones who believe in beloved community. We can look at many other faiths. Buddhism, interdependence of all life; Judaism, justice and healing in the world; Islam, social harmony and cooperation; Unitarianism, the radically relational community with equity and justice for all people; and the Baha'i, the unity of all people, ensuring prosperity of all nations. And so every nation has their version of what they're, what they aspire to, and they can all be fit into this bucket of beloved community. So then why don't we build beloved community? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Certainly one is greed. What's in it for me? And for people who are wealthy, they have to give something up. There's something that I've read, a far-right conservative committee says that they stand against corporate welfare and government handouts that disincentivize prosperity. Basically, they are against anything social programs generally, because that's how they define them. On the other hand, I'm a tax lawyer, so I know very well that the tax code contains a whole lot of tax breaks that only benefit the wealthy, but they don't view that as any kind of welfare, even though the Treasury would call that tax entitlements. So they don't see it as benefiting themselves, just that other people. They get more than what they would be giving. So tribalism, basically we protect our own. That is a big part of being human. Fear, differences threaten us, and people that are Christian nationalists fear erasure, loss of power, a loss of the world that they knew. Risk avoidance, good people who just don't want to get involved. It's easier just to do nothing. And then bad religion. There's a lot of idolatry over there. As someone said, when empire becomes more important than your faith, when imposing your will on everybody else becomes more important than honoring the humanity of others. That's bad religion. It's a lack of true understanding of what religion's about and what faith's about, and forgetting that love was supposed to be the motivation for most faiths. There's a lot of reasons why we don't have beloved community. Christian nationalism is an example of my view of the opposite of beloved community. So in beloved community, everyone's welcome. In Christian nationalism, only conservative white Christians are welcome. Everyone's treated equally in beloved community. Christian nationalism, they would have rules and oppress and discriminate against everybody else. They have a thing called the 7 pillars, where they want to control every single aspect of American society: family, education, religion, business, media, everything, with their views. Beloved community, differences are valued and respected. Not in Christian nationalism. Those are feared and despised and are being put down. Beloved community, you resolve conflict peacefully, but Christian nationalists are very willing to resort to violence. So what I'd like to do, and if we have enough, we could do a breakout, we could try it. We could do like 2, there's actually enough here to have 3 different breakout sessions.
Actually, we can't do that because the people at home wouldn't be able to.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay, well, okay. Then that, why don't we talk a little bit then, just if you'd be willing to have some give and take with me. So how do you see yourself, just how beloved community differs from, or is this, I should say, is this how you see beloved community? Or do you see it differently? And how does it differ from what you kind of see in the world? Be interested in your views. Yes.
Well, clearly there's a big push against DEI and saying, putting laws, especially in Wisconsin, that this is a woke agenda and we will not accept it. And to me, DEI is beloved community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you repeat that for people on the video?
So she was,
Tell them what DEI.
okay, diversity, equity and inclusion. And what she's saying is that beloved community is the opposite of DEI, that DEI is something that is being put down in Wisconsin, and not just Wisconsin, every other place. This is the idea of controlling education, and saying that this discriminates, that DEI discriminates against white people. This is the mantra now. And so, yeah, that's an example, clearly, of something that would not be beloved community in my view. Others.
Book banning.
Book
and
banning.
Taking the history of African Americans or anyone who isn't a white, rich American, trying to reduce that history in the schools.
Right, and they'll tell you, well, that was a long time ago. That's over now. Let's move on. Anything they can to erase those kinds of things. So yeah. Others, yeah, Pete.
I guess in kind of simple terms, it seems like beloved community is somewhat the opposite of this ends justifies the means thinking, because it abandons the process that the whole democracy should be, it's this whole process that we all have trust in, but I think they put bullying and getting their way on policy or whatever by dividing and undercutting the trust. But I think that, we hope that, what we're doing is more important and are really undercutting basic trust in all our institutions and our society. So I think there are a lot of things that pointing directly against it.
Certainly Christian National would we'd have a theocracy here, which is an autocracy. It wouldn't be a democracy, really. It'd be a little bit like what you see what they call illiberal democracies, which are autocracies dressed up to call a little bit like they supposedly have an election, but the same person always amazingly always wins by 99% of the vote. Who knew? But nonetheless, that's what Trump wants to have in this country too. And that's what the Christian nationalists want, because then they can pretty much impose everything that they believe in on everybody else. So, I mean, the idea of monitoring women's pregnancies is just frightening. So we can check to make sure that they don't get an abortion. That should scare every woman, even if you're no longer looking at having children, that should scare you. Yes.
We're using the word community, and we're also taking, I hear, a perspective from the left. I think if we disregard the fact that we need to talk to each other, because people on the left can push you into like a small segment of calling you woke and make you go away, make you disappear. And that doesn't help. And so we're not talking to each other. We can't build a love community. So we have to try to understand what it is. That is my particular belief.
That's very hard when you feel you believe your view so strongly. Of course, they view theirs so strongly too. And we talk about messaging. Number one, it's talking about yourself and trying to find common values, some kind of a place where you can at least start from. I want my children to be safe and to have a happy life, just like you do. So find some common ground. This is how I feel. This is another way that you might look at it, as compared to you're wrong, you're stupid, you're bad. That's not going to bring anybody to your side.
One short, one of the previous ones we had, part of democracy is not everybody.
Right. It's messy, as we see, but that messiness is what we've always viewed as still comes out with generally a better result than if you have one person telling us what we have to do.
I think it's important to think about beloved community in terms of when you're talking about the United States or the world. Because if we're talking about beloved community and all those immigrants on the border, I mean, they're coming from places of poverty, drug addiction, gangs, and so on. And I think in the broader sense, what we have to think about is something like dominant economic model, which is the corporation. And until we address something like that, we're talking about economics where people that can have shares and so on can be invested, but people are expendable and so is the environment. So when we have like globalization, that's affected poverty here in Milwaukee. So I think we have to keep those broadest dimensions in mind.
I think that's very interesting, and it's been talked about that capitalism, which has been kind of the way we've looked at the world for such a long time. When you really look at it hard, it really takes you in one direction, and that may not be the right way to go in the future. If we really truly want to have a loving community. There's a woman back here, her Grace.
I think it was a little bit more on that one, but maybe there's here too. I think one of the biggest things is lack of imagination. Like even a lot of what we're talking about, DEI, banning books, reproductive justice, it feels like those on the left are sort of defensive, like let's just hold the line and not make it worse, instead of actually proposing an alternative that I think other people can understand, and like you were saying, actually bring people in, talk not only across the line, but folks on the same side. So there feels to be like definitely both sides, broadly left and right, push the other away, in a defensive position. So that feels like one of the biggest challenges.
I think we had Jim Wallace come in about a month ago and talk about his new book, and he made the point that we need to save democracy, but then we need to transform democracy, because there's a lot of ways it could be better than it is, and we can't just say this is what we're gonna try to save it and then stop. And so that's kind of what I think what you're saying. Yes. Then we'll keep moving.
2 points in my training in much of my life experiences in the economics, and I do not think that any economic system that compares to capitalism. One caveat, and that is it has to be well regulated. And since 1980 in the Reagan administration, we've been going down the path of deregulation. It is effectively making capitalism not working. Second point, you alluded to tax, and I think taxing is another part of the beloved community. It was recently set in my, and I have Norwegian roots, and they had a survey of people there, and definitely they felt good about paying taxes because they are happiest as a result, maybe not directly, but they're one of the happiest countries in the world because you don't have social problems like we do.
Sorry, what country was that? What country was that?
Norway.
Oh, Norway. Okay.
Yes. So there's 2 facts that I would like to lead everybody. One is that relative to the corporate tax cuts that within what happened is that corporations went from buying back much of their stock to buying even more. If you look at what do corporations pay in income taxes versus how much do they spend on buying back the stock, they spend 2.5 times as much buying back the stock that they pay income tax.
A lot of them don't pay anything.
Yeah, and the other thing is that the wealthiest 10%, well, 70% of the wealth in the country, their income taxes only cover about 25% of them.
Well, and I think it's interesting, again, talk about messaging. The conservatives have been pretty successful in talking about the tax burden. And when you talk about burden, that taxes are bad, as compared to talking about the tax benefits, that money is what can create a great society. And so but that burden is the way that's kind of gotten itself into our societal thinking. That's where I'm saying the conservatives have been way ahead of the progressives in messaging. They've been very good at it. They managed to get rid of most of the estate tax by calling it a death tax, which is not what it is. But nonetheless, once they did that, they won. And so we have to be better at how we message and try to kind of reverse some of that thinking. But I completely agree. We're going to have to move on because we're never going to get done. So I'm going to play another video. This is a longer one, but he talks about how to create a beloved community. And I'd just be interested in what you think about what he says. I hope this works.
Say you're an independent business,
I'm sorry, I
like
don't have
photographer, or a marketing consultant, or designer, or one of thousands of professions that sell services.
Okay.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. When Todd first called and said that the theme was community, I started looking for the ways that community is used. And they're used a lot of different ways: online community, business community, white community, black community, tech community. I even crowdsourced this question to my little cadre of social media followers, and I got all kinds of responses where people felt community. Festivals, football games, funerals, churches. And of course, it might not surprise you that if you look at this, it doesn't really have much of a meaning. It doesn't really tell us what we should be doing if we're trying to build a community. When I think about community, I think about Martin Luther King Jr. And I think about the notion that he put forward of a beloved community. He said, our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls and a quantitative change in our lives. You see, the community that King envisioned is all inclusive. Everybody's a part of it. It can't be exclusionary if it's beloved. Second, if it includes everyone, the differences of its members have to actually be embraced, the beloved part of the community. And then King talked a lot about, when he talked about beloved community, the fact that we all had to work for justice. And not only the justice of ourselves, but we had to work for the justice of every member of the beloved community. Now that is a pretty tall task, but I think it's a necessary one. And King thought it was a necessary one because what he said was that in an interconnected world, the only way we would develop the empathy required to actually solve our problems across our differences was by building the beloved community. So that's the challenge. How do we build the beloved community? Well, what if building the beloved community actually meant us taking one phrase and applying it to ourselves and to our actions? A phrase we've all heard many times: love thy neighbor. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Love thy neighbor? You don't know my neighbor. Or like my wife and I, our walls were so thin, we knew our neighbor far too well. But I don't want us to think about a specific person when we think about love our neighbor. I think we want to look at the root of the word. It actually has two roots: ne, near, and bor, home base, or someone's heart to a certain extent. So if we take this notion of neighbor, instead of thinking about the people who live near us, I want us to turn it around and think about the people who we live near, that we actually start to be a neighbor by living near someone else's home. So in other words, how do you love someone's home base? Well, you can visit their home base, you can visit their community, and I'm sure many of us have. If I went to your home, I'm sure I'd see travel photos and I'd see mementos, maybe artwork from other places, maybe other foods that you consume at home. But those visits are only visits. They are not the deep kind of engagement that we need when we think about beloved community, because if we're going to take this notion seriously, we have to confront a very tough truth. We cannot consume our way to community. One click, one more friend, one more trip is not actually going to build the beloved community. Instead, we need an engagement, an ongoing engagement with other communities and on their home turfs. There was a visit that I made when I was in college. Imagine a Sunday, sticky Sunday in September. I'm on the MARTA bus going down to Old Ebenezer Baptist Church, King's home church on Auburn Avenue. And I go into the church. It was still in the original sanctuary then, and it was a sight. The original pulpit where King preached, the robes of the choir, the long pews, the women wearing their Sunday hats that you always see in an African-American church. And I sat down, and the service started, and we opened up our hymnal to the first song of the day, and I was shocked to discover that the same song that was first that day on Ebenezer Baptist docket was a song that we used to sing in my all-white country church in rural Arkansas. The second song, same one. Third song, same one. I knew all the songs. Now, I didn't sing them as well or as fast as Ebenezer Baptist, but I knew them. And so I jumped right in and I sang them. And this caused a bit of a stir among my seatmates left and right, who I did not know, both African-American folks. They were curious why this 18-year-old kid knew all of these spirituals. So we started talking about it. We started talking about church. We started talking about family. We started talking about home. I went back the next Sunday, and then I went back again. And those visits turned into an engagement, which then turned into an academic pursuit, that then turned into a professional pursuit. And for me, a lifetime of understanding and studying and engaging other. That's more than a visit. That's actually being a neighbor. It's not only that we build community by being the neighbor, but I would argue that being a neighbor is the ultimate expression of love. And the reason is because if we truly love our neighbor, that connection can transform people, and it can actually reconcile the fiercest of enemies. If you look at the history of the American Civil Rights Movement, all the leaders at some point said something along the following lines. We weren't just fighting for African American freedom. We were trying to liberate the oppressors from their mindset. And we were trying to liberate America from the plight of segregation. And no one embodied this more than someone that I've gotten to know, Reverend C.T. Vivian. Reverend C.T. Vivian is a true American hero. He was one of the people who sat in Nashville, was drug out of restaurants, spit upon. He was one of the Freedom Riders, where he was beaten. In Alabama and Mississippi, he was on the bridge in Selma on Bloody Sunday. This is a picture of C.T. praying for Sheriff Jim Clark, who was the feared and some would say murderous sheriff of Selma. I asked him one day, I said, what were you thinking when you walked up every day and prayed for Sheriff Clark? And he said, I'd pray in the morning and I'd go to Sheriff Clark and he would yell at me. And the next day I'd pray and then I'd go and he'd arrest me. And one day he even broke his hand across my jaw when he punched me. And the next day I prayed again because I truly believed that the next day was the day we were going to be reconciled and that he was going to see the evil of his ways. That is stunning. And it is what we see in so many different contexts. Whether you look at Gandhi and the way he thought about the British, you look at Mandela and Tutu and the way they thought about the Afrikaners, they believed that they weren't just freeing themselves, but they were building a whole new society and they were going to reconcile with their neighbors who they were living near. And they were right. Each of those societies were changed because of the practice of loving thy neighbor. Now, these people have risen to the world of almost being saintly. And so it begs the question, how do we actually build our own capacity to be a neighbor, to practice this notion of loving our neighbors? Well, I believe that actually it is a combination of a mindset, the notion of beloved community, the notion of loving thy neighbor, living near their home base, and a certain skill set, that there actually are a few attributes that you can develop over time. And I'd like to just take a minute to kind of run through them. First one of these, and probably most important, is a true respect for otherness. If you're going to actually venture out and visit someone's home base and be the only person who is different who's there, you have to actually truly respect the otherness. I've done a lot of cross-community work, and I've often been the only other in the room, the only white person, the only male, the only Southerner, the only whatever. And I used to, when I first started this, I used to try to fit in. So, maybe I'd dress a certain way, or maybe I'd change my accent a little bit, or maybe I'd try to find an artist that I thought somebody would like, and I would make these false connections. But that was the ultimate disrespect of the people I was visiting. I had to maintain my authenticity to show the actual respect of the other. And that's the basis that we have to enter communities. We have to maintain ourselves so that we actually can, when we ask a question, we can actually be asking it in truth. The second is, as we venture out, we don't have the ability to listen in the regular way. Maybe we speak the language, but we don't know the shorthand. We don't know the cultural markers. We don't know the landscape. And so we have to develop the ability to listen with our hearts. A friend of mine who's a social worker tells a story that among grief counselors, it's well known that grief is often expressed in one's native tongue. No matter how long they've lived in another country, whatever they first grew up with is the tongue and the language that they express true grief with. And the best grief counselors don't ask them to translate. They simply listen emotionally. They listen with their hearts in order to see what that person is feeling and see what they need. We have to cultivate the same sense. We have to listen with our hearts so that we can actually engage people who are very different from us and situations that are very different from us. The third is we have to have authenticity but flexibility of behavior. I lived in India for a while, and one of my projects, I was a consultant, I had a team, and it was all Indians, and the client was all Indians. And we had a kickoff lunch to start the project. It was a nice buffet spread of Indian food. There was the food, there were the plates, there were the napkins. There were the peppers, there were the spices, there was the bread, there's no silverware. So I sort of paused a minute, looked around the room to see how this was happening, and I noticed that people were setting up their plate a certain way. They were using the bread to basically dip the food, eat with their hands. So I did the same thing. I set my plate up the same way. I went and sat down. I started eating with my hands. Didn't say anything, no drama, nothing. 6 members from the client came up to me. He said, you know, we were very worried about you when this project started. I said, oh, really? Why? He said, because we didn't think you were going to be able to connect with us, being an American and everybody else on the team being Indian. And he said, something happened and changed our mind. I said, what was it? He said, the first day you ate with your hands and you didn't say anything about it. You didn't make a big deal out of it. That ability to take a little bit of information and apply it in real time, to have a little bit of flexibility of behavior, can build enormous connection with someone else, especially when you're new to a community. Another is that you have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. Now, rounded to the nearest 1,000, how many times do you think that I've been asked, what is a white guy doing running the Center for Civil and Human Rights? It's in the tens of thousands now. And when I first started with the job, a lot of times I would react a bit defensively. I would say, well, where's this person coming from? But very quickly, I noticed that 99% of the time, that question was actually asked from the very least curiosity, and most often it was a positive. So I would simply answer it, and then it would open a conversation. Someone would say, here's my connection to the topic. Here's my family story. Here's what I think you should be doing. And it became a positive exchange. If we're open to the ambiguity that exists when we first enter another community, it will often open up a very intimate conversation quickly. But if we're defensive, if we shut it down, if we try to make it about us, we'll miss that opportunity. The final one that we have to cultivate is one that's very hard to do, and that's overcoming the fear of accidental offense. Now, let me try to do my best and say, I absolve you of all guilt of accidental offense starting today. Because if you're going to venture out, if you're going to actually practice being a neighbor to different communities, you're going to accidentally offend. My favorite story comes from my own family. My wife's family is originally from India. My family is originally from Oklahoma. And before we were married, my father and I visited my fiance then's parents' house without my fiance. We arrived, we had pleasantries, we drank tea, and then my father and I went to take our bags upstairs where we were going to sleep. My father grabbed his bag because he likes to show that he's still pretty spry as an older guy, and carried it up the stairs, and I grabbed mine and carried it up the stairs. This caused a very fluxant phone call from my mother-in-law to-be to my fiance. And she said, what is Doug doing disrespecting his father? And my wife said, what do you mean? And she said, he didn't carry his father's bag up the stairs. Doesn't he know that that's what we do? Well, this opened up a very interesting and ultimately an amazing conversation about the differences in elders, respect, culture across our burgeoning family. Sometimes we have to venture out. We will accidentally offend, but if we're open to it, we will make the connections and we will overcome that very quickly. You know, when I think something happened very early on that makes this whole topic extremely personal to me. I said earlier that I was from a rural town in Arkansas. It was 1,200 people when I grew up there. It's now a thriving metropolis of 2,000 people. I mean, it's just grown exponentially. And when I grew up there, we used to have a joke that there were 2 minority families in town, the 2 Catholic families. Because there was no racial, ethnic, religious diversity really of any kind in my little town in Arkansas. And so in one ways, it was an idyllic community. But in another way, it was not the beloved community because it wasn't all inclusive. It didn't allow everybody to be a part of it. So that's where I was from. And being from there, I also was a huge fan of Arkansas college football, as almost anyone is there, the Roaring Razorbacks. And when my brother went to college there, he was older than I was, a guy who lived on his hall, and he said, if you come to the football game, Arthur will be able to get you on the football field. Well, this was the greatest news that I had heard in my 5 years of life, that I would be able to get onto the football field. So we go to the University of Arkansas and I meet Arthur and he takes me on the football field, and he is an incredible guy. He is kind. He is one of those people who connects with kids. He explains to me everything about football. This is a picture of that meeting. I'm on the left. Arthur was my hero. He was the greatest guy I'd ever met. So I convinced my parents and my brother to bring Arthur home to my little town to visit us. Well, the return trip didn't go as well. When Arthur moved around the community, things were said, people were a bit hostile. It was not a great reception. And Arthur's response to it was the same he had had to me. He was kind, he was loving, he was accepting, he was empathetic. He visited our home base in a way that was giving, even though people didn't want him to be there. And that moment set me on a path to do my very best to try to build that empathy within myself for various communities. It inspired me then, it continues to inspire me now. And it's something that I think is epitomized by a quote from someone who, of course, knows a lot about being a neighbor, Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers said, "Love isn't a state of perfect caring. It's an active noun like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person right here and now." That's exactly what Arthur did. When he visited our home, he accepted everyone he encountered, good, bad, or indifferent, exactly who they were right then and right there. This notion of love thy neighbor is something that, for me, transformed me very early in life. It's something that, as I have studied the American Civil Rights Movement and other social movements, it shows itself to have a transformative power on society, and it's the only way that enemies can be reconciled. And as we look across our community, as we look across our world, the problems strike me as being communal in nature. Whether it be the environment or economics and poverty or freedom and human rights, they're all communal. And I believe today that the only way we can build the capacity individually and collectively to address our communal problems is by pursuing the beloved community, by loving our neighbors. I hope that we'll get started today. Thank you.
Okay, so we aren't going to have time to go through some of these other things. I've got to get out of this. Not sure how to get out of this now. My other pieces. Interesting. Let me just, I'm not quite sure how to get out of this. Do you know how to do that? Get out of this video, but escape. I'm looking for the escape. Upper left. There you go. Thank you. Okay. Whoops. So what he is, so what this man is talking about is how to build beloved community. And he talks about a number of things. One of them is that we have to actually engage with other communities. We have to go to them. They're not going to come to us. We need to respect their otherness. We need to respect people, listen with our hearts, be flexible in how we act, be open to ambiguity, avoid defensiveness, and overcome our fear of accidental offense. There's a number of other things that I'm not going to have time to talk about, but I want to just mention a couple of other things that are other pieces of this. And one of them is that we need to be able to think about changing our culture. And there's one more, and a piece of this is how do we address the violence that is inside of us? To see ourselves as connected to each other. We can only survive and thrive together, to really believe that, to believe that you are my issues, your issues are my issues. Turn fear into love, competition into collaboration, scarcity into abundance, and indifference and judgment into radical empathy. And the other piece is to change the way that we think, to change our thinking from absolutes, where we see this is what has to be, versus analysis. Does this really have to be that way? Is there another way that might be better? Shifting our language from inflammatory quips where we just antagonize to inquisitive questions. And then shifting our culture from looking at things from a negative viewpoint, all the damage that's been done, to look for the beauty. And the idea that we aren't going to change the world, we change one thing that we do. We change one thought, we change one word, and all of those things help. We have about 1 minute. So I just thought I would just get your reaction to some of the things that you've heard. How difficult do you think that is? Do you think that's doable? Are there other things that you've experienced that you think might work as well? So I'm just going to open it up and for the next few minutes and just see what your response is to some of the things that I see.
Okay, and we do have time, you know,
Yeah, we'll take a little bit of time just to talk about that. Yeah.
So we would like to call it the event that's coming up on July 13th to July 14th. And we have some flyers about that, but it is called a rally for democracy. We all belong. And so I think we have enough flyers. Yeah. It's a matter to save the day and tell your friends. And by the way, you're doing great.
Oh, thanks. Yes.
So sometimes it's more than people. So I is a very conservative, religious guy, and he won't talk to me because he doesn't like my lifestyle and what I say. I mean, he simply won't talk to me. Yeah, he's talked to me once in the last 30 years.
I think for someone, I do think that when you talk about messaging, that if there are certain people that you don't kind of waste your time on, frankly, because they're never going to that are, you know, there's people that are hardcore, then there are ones who maybe are leaning conservative, but you try to move them just from that to maybe neutral. Maybe move someone who's neutral to maybe more leaning and seeing the point of view of someone else. But if you have someone who simply won't, there's a lot of other people that you should be talking to.
And it's interesting because his wife will talk to me, and his daughter will talk to me. Yeah, and actually his daughter even invited us to her wedding.
Yeah. Different people. And in some ways I'd focus on the daughter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get her to change, you know, her view if you're not going to have access to.
No, her daughter is more on my side of it.
Yeah.
She's very open and progressive and stuff.
Mhm.
So she's been working on her father for a long time. It's not moving him at all.
Right. And some people won't be moved. That's just the reality.
That's right.
So we focus on the ones who might be moved. Others. Yeah, some people see beloved community as just a threat, something that they never want anything to do with. They're never going to be part of one, probably. Reality. So. Anybody else? What else? Other reaction? Yes.
Yeah, one of the, as a psychologist, one of the things of Jesus, and you mentioned it here, that's really important. When Jesus said, love thy neighbor as thyself, and what psychology has discovered with attachment theory and so on, a lot of people don't love themselves. So if you don't start from a sense that you're not going to have that authenticity that Guy mentioned in being able to engage other people, it's going to be much more difficult for you to live in ambivalent situations because you don't feel kind of strong, ground. I was like to add that whenever I hear Jesus quote.
You know, there's another video that I've seen, and the fellow said that when you're trying to influence somebody else, most of the work is with yourself. You've got to do the work with yourself so that you're able to then, as you're right, you're becoming an authentic person for the other. And then you're free to be able to express what you're doing. Oops, keeps doing that. But if you don't have yourself together, then you kind of revert back just to anger, and you're just going to exacerbate whatever problems you've already got. So you're right. Yes.
What I find somewhat astonishing in all of this is that people on the right who hate the immigrants, the people of color,
are the same ones who will have their routes changed by all these Mexican American people who are, not to bring the breed, but they have their gardens taken care of. I mean, it's such a, I can't think of that.
Well, I think they see the world though. I think they see themselves though as, you know, their role in the world, God-given role is to lead others. Everybody else's God-given role is to serve. So it all fits in their mindset, you know. And it's interesting. I was at a mission project the last 3 days, and a lot of conservative Christians were there who spend a lot of time doing mission work. And so that would seem a little, you know, but they don't do social justice work though. So that's kind of how they've defined their goodness, by helping others. But that's not the same as serving others. And so it's an interesting mindset, but that's the part about trying to truly understand where they're coming from, or else you're not able. As a tax lawyer, I lobbied a lot in DC with the IRS and Treasury, and we always lobbied from weakness because they always had all the power. And so we had to go in there and find out what they cared about. And then we had to address their concerns. And that's exactly what's happening. You have to know what the other people care about and talk to what they care about. So you'll find consistency when you start to look at it. You may not like it, but yeah. Yeah.
And I think that hits on the point Dr. King said, the local communities that are requiring qualitative change.
Yes.
There are quantitative ones. There are culture, and the qualitative to me has come down to when I start thinking of someone in the stereotype, or I start thinking of somebody being, what are they thinking? How can they possibly? Then I'm not looking harder. Because the qualitative change in me is that avoid jumping to that immediate gut reaction. So I'll never understand what they're thinking. If I don't try, I'm right. I won't ever understand. So I have to step back and say, what is it that they see in their worldview that I can connect on? That's a concern that's also my concern. And maybe that's a start with some dialogue. Because if I jump automatically to that extreme to see, I'm never going to understand them. There's never going to be a meeting of common ground. They're always then it's a flaw. I'm never going to help move to.
I think it's interesting too, and it's the story of, you know, love thy neighbor. Jesus gives a story of the good Samaritan, but the good, you know, this was a story of a man who was beaten and left to die on the side of the road. And people that should have been cared about him walked by and didn't care and didn't do anything for him. It was the Samaritan who was despised by this man and despised by the whole culture who helped him. And so it was somebody that should have hated this guy that was able to find that compassion. So we need to be that Samaritan who can see the need to still help and care about those other people. And that's why it's so hard to be in beloved community. Because you're not just going to be like this guy in his little Arkansas town. Everyone's the same. It's talking about diversity, and diversity creates, you know, discomfort and conflict sometimes, and we have to find a way to overcome that. Hard. Yes.
I'm just going to ask you, how do we do it one-on-one is one thing. How do we do it at scale? You know, to make a difference in the world. I just wonder if you can talk about how MICAH is approaching trying to move the people a little bit on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different ways. Certainly one-on-ones are a big piece of that if you have someone to have these kinds of one-on-one conversations. But, you know, we've also done, just like I'm here today, you know, we go to a number of places and talk about this with groups of people. And we have events where we bring in, like a Jim Wallace, we're going to bring in some big speakers in July to talk about some of these things as well, just to make sure that there's going to be door-to-door canvassing done as well. So there's a number of different ways that you can reach people to try to at least introduce a different way of thinking to them. Hopefully that then, you know, the idea is to try to help other people get the knowledge and the skill set to be able to then go out and talk to others. So there's a multiplication effect here if If I talk to you, then you talk to somebody else, and they talk to somebody else, that is an exponential effect. But that's what I'm thinking. If you have something else you wanted to offer. Yeah.
Discussed in that conference about that religion. And I think once you bring religion and spirituality into the question, it really amplifies problems. And the thing is, Christian nationalists, but also the Orthodox Jews with the Gaza problem, and the Hindu nationalists. So when you get God on your side, it's pretty hard to discuss with people. So I think one of the things we have to talk about is that, okay, your religion, that's a spiritual heritage that's meaningful for you, but you have to accept that other people have come to the same, hopefully, spiritual enlightened place by different processes. And it's one of the problems I see in Christianity. You have to believe in Jesus or you're going to hell, especially the conservative.
Right. And I think that some of the the issue for me is whether you've co-opted your religion to be what you want it to be, as compared to really, because Christianity and all these religions, if you really truly delved into them, it's going to push you to be something that is going to make you uncomfortable at times. And so rather than that, people just kind of reframe it to be something that they're comfortable with. And that's not really the true faith. And so that's my view, is where religion is becomes a danger. In a theocracy, you basically would have Donald Trump telling a guy that never goes to church at all, telling us how we're supposed to believe and act. And it's not even close to, and basically co-opting Christianity, which then would exclude almost the other religions completely. That is not religion. And yet that's what's being portrayed as religion. So I think we are definitely out of time, but thank you so much for hanging with me. I really did enjoy hearing all of your comments. Thank you.